Well, with me in the studio today, I have two of my favorite people, great friends, Colleen and Jason Wachob. I always say your name wrong. Have I said it right?
It's Wachob, but it's close.
Wachob. Oh gosh.
Oh,
okay, you see, because I'm your friend, I'm allowed to say your name wrong. I don't know what that is. It's my South African background, I think, but the CH, I always want to do that sound, So anyway, Jason and Colleen, it is such an honor to have you in the studio with me. Your work's amazing. It's just everything you do is just something that impacts society in the way that it should. We need to be talking about this because our physicians are not getting trained in this whole mind-body connection. It's been established in literature for years, for thousands of years. We know that what we do with our life is going to impact how we function physically, and we can't separate ourselves from the environment. So thank you for writing this book, and thank you for coming to share your great stories with me on my show today.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you.
Well, I love talking to you both so much. It's always so wonderful. Let's start off with just the fact that you've written this book together and you've both got such an incredible story. So just tell us the story and why you wrote the book.
Well, we've been looking at the wellness world very critically over the past couple of years, and it seems like there's a lot of polarity from our point of view that mirrors so many of the problems that we have in society. There's a lot of loud voices on social media. We know that the algorithms are driven to promote anger. And so people are literally incentivized to have polarizing point of views. And we've learned that it makes it nearly impossible for normal people, never mind folks who have devoted their life. We still find it hard to figure out how we should be living our life. We wanted to give practical advice that people can integrate into their lives so that they can have meaningful impact. And we think the biggest thing that's missing from all of these conversations, especially after the past 2+ years, is really this essential nutrient of joy. That no habit, no lifestyle change is going to be sustainable unless you can do it in a way that brings you joy. And that might take time to develop, but it is the essential nutrient that we're not talking enough about.
And to build off of what Colleen said with regards to the algorithms, unfortunately, they create a feedback loop that incentivizes extremes, specifically anger. Scott Galloway, in his great new book, Adrift, talks about a study from Wharton. And what they did at Wharton is they looked at articles from the New York Times that went viral, and they categorized them by emotion. They looked at anxiety, awe, and anger. And for every standard deviation, an increase of anxiety elicited, the probability of an article making the most emailed list went up by 21%. So for awe, it went to 30. But by far and away, the most powerful emotion was anger. Anger increased virality by 34%.
That's
so
crazy.
If you just pause for a moment and think about that, this is the New York Times. And anger is driving more clicks, more revenue, and is symbolic of social media. Social media is a giant hate machine driven by extreme points of view that drive the most powerful emotion of anger. And it's crossed over to our world, the health and wellness world, in a huge way. That is unproductive and unhelpful. And for us, it's extraordinarily frustrating because we believe the path forward is one that is balanced, can be joyful, and is backed by science. And that is not what the algorithms are looking for.
Isn't that frustrating? It's incredible. As you said, the algorithm just goes in one direction, and it's so consuming that's what people think they're defining success based on on the incorrect algorithm. And that in itself is anger provoking. We have to be careful that we don't get traumatized by just that or have the wrong sort of reaction to that. So you two have had the right reaction. You're seeing this problem and you decided to address it at its root. So can you give an example of how this is manifesting in the wellness world? Because this has been your world with mindbodygreen for, years now. And you've really made a massive impact and a huge footprint in the world of wellbeing. But it's overwhelming. There's a million books out there. There's everyone with advice. There's so many supplements. And there's this anger thing. So I'd love your take on give us some examples on that. How's this thing gone a bit crazy?
I think nutrition is one that comes top of mind. I think nutrition is a world of extremes where many of your most powerful personal brands have a point of view that is an all or nothing point of view. On one hand, I've potentially 100% carnivore, and on the other hand, I'm potentially 100% vegan. And not to say that, and those things they're powerful diets and they work for a lot of people, but they don't work for everyone. And so they are extremes. They are all or nothing diets. And you see a lot of people who proselytize in a way that is almost a religion. And what you don't see a lot of, so you see a lot of influencers on both sides. You don't see a lot of Mediterranean diet influencers.
No.
And, maybe Dan Buettner's the closest, but he's not pure Mediterranean diet. And the Mediterranean diet is kind of balanced, kind of has a lot of great science behind it. It's hard to really rip apart. So it's kind of unsexy. It doesn't, I don't see a lot of vitriol in the comments section around the Mediterranean diet. It doesn't elicit anger. And I think, it is probably the most balanced of all the diets. And you don't see a lot of it on social media.
That's so interesting. So the thing that we should be doing that's got the most balance, not the thing that we should be doing, because as you say, some people, they do need to have a very specific type of diet. But in terms of the balance side, if it's too normal, it doesn't get attention, but then it draws people's mind in the wrong direction and it creates the wrong kinds of arguments. So is that the anger that you are or the frustration you two feel that's happening in the wellness industry, these extreme sides of the coin?
I think these extreme sides of the coin have led to a real fraction within the wellness world, where it used to be a community, and now there are various tribes that prefer to debate with vitriol as opposed to come together, find solutions, and have it be more productive. And nutrition is the biggest area because everyone has a point of view on nutrition. We all eat several times a day. We know what works or not for our bodies. So it's the biggest landmine.
That's a really good way of putting it, that it's moved from a community to tribes that argue. And I mean, where has that ever helped anyone? And it kind of goes to our whole society currently, because I know you address in your book about isolation and you address some of those things, and people are talking about this concept, but it goes to the individualistic society that the United States and Western communities tend to have adopted versus your community focus. And there's such a call back. Everyone I'm interviewing currently, and I'm sure you guys are experiencing this too, there's such an awareness of the need for going back, getting away from the isolation and back to more community focused around whatever, whether it's diet, whether it's just being a human, all the aspects of humanity. Yet there's still as you say, the social media creates a contradictory pattern, because for you to become popular and famous, you have to create anger. It's like a very upside down setup.
And our view on nutrition, I think it would have been very easy for us to just say, well, here's our view and here's our diet. And here's the good food list and the bad food list, and let's move on, and we'll pick a hero superfood, and then we'll pick a villain food that everyone should avoid. And that's just not our philosophy. And when you look at the science and you look at the tribes, I think for the most part, everyone can agree that we are consuming way too many ultra-processed foods. 58% of calories in the American adult diet are coming from ultra-processed foods. Number 67% among children and adolescents. And
that's crazy.
Think most people can agree that eating real foods, whole foods, is the way to go. And we're not going to tell you exactly what to eat. We believe in the power of what we would call your own N of one study. We are all unique individuals. You should always, consult with your physician, listen to your body. And the example we use from the book, two good friends of ours, Mark Sisson at 69 and Rich Roll at 56. These two people are in incredible shape if you look them up on Instagram. And in terms of their philosophy, they couldn't be more far apart in terms of diet. Rich is 100% vegan. Mark is close to being carnivore. They don't eat a lot of processed food, though. they also work out a ton. They're in incredible shape. And who are we to say? Who's anyone to say that what Mark is doing is bad, or what Rich is doing is bad, or vice versa, or they're both good? I think it shows the power of we're all N of one studies. There are some people who can look at red meat and their cholesterol raises, goes to the roof just by looking at it. And there's some people who could eat, pounds of bacon and it doesn't move. I'm not saying do that experiment, but the larger point we're trying to make is, we do think we're at a point where collectively we are understanding the risk of eating too much processed food, and we should probably avoid it. There's a study from France that showed that a 10% increase in highly processed food led to a 14% increase risk of death. 10% ultra processed food, 14% increased risk of death. So that's where we landed. And we encourage everyone to figure out what works for them.
I love that. I wrote a book a few years ago called Think and Eat Yourself Smart. And one of the main statements I say in the book, and as you were talking, it was making me think of that, is I said, eat real food mindfully, because your mind's going to drive it through your body, and you've got to, the end is a great example. As you say, we've got to be all so different. And that seemed to be the philosophy, and it's always been yours. But the wellness industry, as you're both saying, has really become a set of tribes that are debating and saying you have to this, that is wrong. And that's sad, because why has it gone that way? As science, as knowledge has increased, it's gone in that direction. Why do you think that's happened? Because we have more knowledge now than we did 10 years ago, for example, or 5 years ago. Why has it gone in this direction? Because that's not helpful to people.
There's an interesting study that we cite in the book that's out of Harvard about how there's been a decline in religion, yet simultaneously people are seeing this same type of identity that they used to find through religion in wellness groups. So whether it be their CrossFit tribe or their Soul Cycle tribe, if I were to say those words, you are conjuring in your head images of what that means. So I think it's a replacement of what we used to find in our spiritual and religious path, and people are now sorting their identities in these wellness niches in a way that's probably tipped the scales where it's no longer productive and healthy.
Okay. So it's very typical of humans to kind of go on one side and extreme, and then the other side of extreme, and then hopefully reach the middle of the road. And we've done the extreme processing with technology, and that was all the big thing to get women back to help women at home, the 50s. And then we've gone extremely healthy. And now hopefully we're going to get some balance back again, because when I say extremely healthy, we've gone on the other side of the road where it's become extremely I should say, not healthy, but these extremes of what health looks like. That's what I meant to say. So hopefully there's some balance. Now your book, you're pretty much saying that your book is all about, and your approach at mindbodygreen is all about trying to achieve this middle of the road balance.
And I think it's about finding out what your body needs. So we'll have in the book different integration tips that can get you to 80% of where you want to be healthy, which is good enough for me. And it reaches a point where I found it to be productive and additive to my life. So that means I'm not obsessively tracking. I'm finding the time to enjoy both the comfort foods that I love and the donuts on the weekends, while also having an intentionality to it. I think sometimes when you say those things, people are like, oh, okay, so it's just intuitive. No, there is an intentionality that we have to bring to it.
Yes.
But then there's cases like Jason's where, because of his family history, he's going for the 100% optimization on certain longevity markers. And I think the most difficult part of everything we talk about in the book is there is this self-empowerment of having to really be the one who is making these health and well-being choices. There's so many great mentors and guides and, health and well-being professionals, but ultimately it's up to you to figure out the path that works best for you. And that's where the real hard work comes in.
That's so good. Do you want to tell your backstory now? I know we kind of dived into, and we can come back to tips and ideas for people, because I think I definitely want to explore what you're saying a little deeper, because you handle it so well in the book. But let's go back to why you both wrote this book. What are your stories? Because the narratives drive the action. And I think that guides, it really guides people into help understanding where you're coming from.
So for me, my passion right now is longevity. And as Colleen mentioned, the men in my family do not have a good longevity track record. My father died of heart disease at 47. My maternal grandfather died of heart disease at 49. And my paternal grandfather died of cancer at 44.
Wow.
I'm 48. And
you've beaten all of them.
I'm beating all of them. And it is my belief that our genes are not our destiny.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in epigenetics. I believe that we have the power to turn off or turn on genes through lifestyle modification.
Agreed.
And my mission is not only to be around and here for our two young girls who are 6 and 3 for quite some time, but to be healthy and vibrant and also empower people with information so they can do the same thing. And, as we think about health and wellness, specifically longevity, I think that the knock or the obstacle that a lot of people will point to is, I don't have the time, I don't have the resources, and this is just too much. And where we went with this book is to find the time-tested, scientifically driven practices that I would say most people can incorporate into their routine that will have a dramatic impact on not only their lifespan, but their health span. And that's the why behind everything we do and the book and, our passion, my passion.
Yeah, so I got thrown headfirst into the wellness world when I had a pulmonary embolism just over 10 years ago. And I strongly believe that if your life is going around at status quo, you may or may not make a big life-changing shift. I had to kind of hit that rock bottom to really look at a life which otherwise on paper looked pretty fine, to really understand the leap I needed to make in my own life to get back into a state of equilibrium. And this journey, really connected me with a more purpose-driven kind of quest in terms of figuring out purpose and connection and what role that would play in my life, for the first time. And also embarked on a decade-long journey in health and well-being. And I didn't have a guide, so it was a little bit of a circuitous route. And part of this book is it's the roadmap that I wish I had 10 years ago, where I was trying everything under the sun. And it was a game of Marco Polo to see what kind of stuff, what helped made me feel better. And along that journey, met some amazing, inspiring healers that helped and also had some negative experiences. And what I wish I had learned then when I embarked on this journey is, because everyone is so unique, you can't tackle everything at one time. And when you hit rock bottom, you kind of want to, fix everything with great speed, but really focusing on what will have the highest ROI in your life, what's going to have the biggest shift, and start there as opposed to kind of tackling everything, which you won't be able to make big leaps on.
Given our experience, in our decade plus years with mindbodygreen, we've seen it all. We've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. We've seen trends that really weren't trends that become fads. We've seen science that really was shoddy. We've seen incredible experts. And so the goal of the book was to synthesize all of that and put it together in one place, because the beauty of our age is we've got so much information and there's so much at our fingertips, but it also makes this the most confusing time to be in health and wellness.
For sure.
Because if you're searching for answers, it is almost impossible. There's contradictory information everywhere. And so our goal was become the source of truth, if you will, for certain principles. And we think we accomplished that with this book.
Well, I think what's key in your book and what you do at mindbodygreen is you base it on, there's scientific data and its principles as opposed to rules. And I think that's really key I love that. I love that it's principles and you recognize the uniqueness of the individual. and you're not throwing anything out. And that's really key because that brings a nice balance. But you both, you've glossed over your stories, and I want to come back to them because you were busy, two really busy people. You didn't have kids at one stage. You were like both in the apparel industry. You were working round the clock, and you were not eating. What's the restaurant that you have your name on all over, Jason?
My face is a picture of me. Well, I guess a caricature of me. It lives at the Palm Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan on the West Side, next to Adam Sandler and Joe Namath.
I love it.
I earned that after consuming so much steak and so many martinis in my 20s. Different life, different priorities, not the right ones, I would say. So if you want to see what I looked like 20 years ago and see how I'm doing, you can go to the
you go and do a comparison. You should be holding up. You should be holding up the before and after now.
Totally.
Oh my goodness. So, but you were both extremely busy as well. So just talk about that, because I mean, you landed up with, because I've interviewed you before, Jason, and you had quite a shock, a scare in your life, and with a pulmonary embolism, you had a skip. So both of you in this high lifestyle, not really watching what you're eating, or you're both exercising and everything. You were doing that, but it's still. So what happened? What was going on?
I would say I just couldn't walk. I had 2 extruded discs in my lower back pressing on my sciatic nerve. So I had excruciating sciatica. I could not walk. Went to a doctor. He said, you need back surgery. Nothing against surgery, but generally see it as the last resort. Sought a second opinion. That doctor said the same thing, but he said, maybe yoga could help. So I started practicing a little bit of yoga, but with the idea of, hey, if it didn't work, I'll still get surgery. No big deal. Turned out yoga did help over the course of a couple of months. And to this day, I've never gotten back surgery. And that was the inspiration for starting mindbodygreen, because it was very clear to me at the time that true well-being was this blend of mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, and environmental well-being. They were all interconnected, hence one word, mindbodygreen, not 3. But my experience is pale in the comparison of Colleen's, because she's lucky to be alive. Her lungs were literally showers of clots.
Yeah, you don't survive that easily.
Maybe Colleen does. I remember it because it was horrifying. Colleen was we were taking the subway, and she was so out of breath taking the escalator that she had to sit down.
Oh, yeah. That's scary.
And I think as women, we're very easy to dismiss the symptoms and say,
absolutely,
everything's fine. Oh, that's nothing. And I remember the day because it was a Saturday afternoon in New York. And the idea of heading to the hospital seemed like such an inconvenience that I was almost bargaining with Jason, and saying how fine I was, no need, bargaining with my doctor who we called on the phone, totally fine, and downplaying any of the symptoms, even though obviously I had never collapsed on a subway before. And when I think back on all of this, I wish that I had listened more to my body's whispers so that it didn't have to give me this giant wake-up call. And I think when you're living this life, it's easy to make excuses of why I'm getting sick all the time, or maybe why I'm not feeling as fulfilled. Oh, I'm putting in my time. There's a narrative that it's really easy to gravitate towards, and I needed to just get stopped in my tracks. And then I had literally just a 6-month recovery of where I felt I was going through life on autopilot, because I had this invisible illness in that I looked fine on the outside. You would look at me and think I was strong and fit, but I was struggling to breathe. It takes a while to work the clots out of your body. And so it was a very different, perspective on life that definitely brought me to my knees and made me open to conversations that I never would have been open to otherwise. So I hope that, we can all do a better job of listening to the whispers so that we don't have to reach these rock bottom points before we think about what's the type of life we want to lead and how do I architect a life to have that.
So thank you for sharing that. So do you think that you both got caught up in hustle culture in your previous life, prior to kind of the wake-up call, the whispers in your body? When you talk about the whispers in your body and just the lifestyle, and what was going on?
It was a lot of achievement culture for me. I think it was, what's the job? What's the promotion? And it was a lot of things that I thought I should be doing. And this, for me, this whole pulmonary embolism was so much more than just the date and the nights in the hospital. It was the recovery and kind of the self-discovery process that took place, and really rethinking about what my value system actually was. And I think that there's so much that we are missing when it comes to educating ourselves to truly, prepare to live a life that's joyful, of how to eat, how to move. When I was so burnt out and kind of overworked, the last thing I probably should have been doing for my body was intense cardio. But I was hearing, oh, that's what you do.
That's good.
Exactly. That's good. Yeah. That's run. And I wasn't giving myself permission to think about what my body needed. So it was probably what I needed at that moment in time was something a lot more gentle, something that would help me fall asleep, something that would help me melt away stress. But I think you get this idea of what you're supposed to do. And then there's so much hard work about thinking through, is that really what I need now? And when I think of my journey after healing and then becoming a mom, having kids, and then now our kids being slightly older, 3 and 6, it's like you need so many different things at each moment in life, even if it's not, fall on your knees, come to the ground kind of moment.
Yeah.
But that's the deciphering and, the work that you have to kind of do is use these tools, but then also bring it back to your N of 1 of what do I need in this moment in time?
Very powerful. So both of you, when you talk about the whispering, listening to the whispers of your body, and you talk about the epigenetics, both of it, and just everything you've said, you both basically saying that your environment impacted you. So you can't remove yourself from the environment. So it's you in the environment, and how you're processing and experiencing that environment has impacted how your body has responded. And certain things happened where you actually had to go and relook at how you're using your mind to actually use your body. And that led you on this journey where you've landed up today, and now you're putting that wisdom into this book. So the mind-brain-body connection in mindbodygreen is very, very strong. And in both of your lives, you believe that, I can see that you believe that that's a very big element. Can you talk about that, and just in terms of mental health? Because, look, and my approach and the approach on this podcast to mental health is not an illness. It's not a neurobiological correlate. It's not a genetic disease. It is our response to being a human in life and responding to our environment, and how we respond to our environments and process, childhood trauma and all the levels of trauma and continuum that we go through, and how that plays out in our health and wellness. And I know we both collectively know Frank Lipton, who helped to identify your homocysteine levels, Jason, being through the roof, which indicated inflammation in your brain and your body. And how he's very much into mind-brain-body medicine as well, and linked it back to the mind-brain-body connection. So that I lay that foundation to say there is a tremendous need for medicine, wellness industry, psychology, psychiatry, humanity, and humans just in general to go back to what we've known for thousands of years. And what the scientific literature has shown us for the last couple of 100 years is that you can't separate out the mind-brain-body connection. It's going to be an impact whether you like it or not. So take it from there. Jason, I can see I've stimulated some thoughts.
You can. And I have another personal story. About a year and a half ago, a good friend of mine who I played basketball with in college, I found out had colon cancer. I never go on Facebook, and I logged onto Facebook, and it was the first thing I saw. And I said, oh my God, I reached out to him, and he, was doing chemotherapy and seemed to be doing okay. And I said, well, what tipped the doctor off? How did you know? And he said, well, he also had some heart issues and was in for his physical. And on his labs, his iron levels had dropped precipitously. And when your iron levels drop precipitously, it could potentially be a sign of some sort of internal bleeding in the gut area. And the advice is, if that happens, you do a colonoscopy. And they did it, and turns out it was colon cancer. And So I said, I was very happy with doing okay. And about a week later, I worked with Dr. Frank Lipman and I got my labs back and my iron had dropped precipitously. And I'm saying to myself, oh my God, wow. I just talked to Jim. Is this the sign I have colon cancer?
Your mind's going everywhere.
And I would say, usually very positive, but I just kind of spiraled. And they strongly advised to do a colonoscopy, regardless of my preconceived notions. And my friend was like, you need to do a colonoscopy. I was due for one. I was 40, just before I was turning 47. And leading up to that, I started to feel pain in my stomach. I started to experience knots and like my stomach felt off. When I had trouble digesting, and I started to feel like, wow, there's something really wrong here. And I remember going in to do the colonoscopy, and it was like severely delayed. And I'm just like sitting on the gurney. They like take my blood pressure. It's like through the roof, and I've got normal blood pressure. And it's like,
you're just really anxious.
I'm nervous.
Yeah.
And so, and I opted for the colonoscopy, endoscopy. I'm like, why not? Let's do both.
Let's do everything.
Yeah, I'm 100% clean. And I was totally fine. And to me, it was I'm extraordinarily grateful and fine, but it was such a learning experience.
Yeah.
I literally created symptoms I was experiencing, which were very real to me in my stomach. And I'm still glad I did the test and still got that certainty. And to this day, my iron is still like a little bit of a mess and no one can figure it out. And I put my hands up, and I've had this discussion with Frank, is, sometimes things are just a little bit wacky and there is no good why behind it. And your labs are never going to be perfect. And I've joked, maybe the moment they are, gotta watch out. You might get hit by a bus.
Exactly. You just never know.
And it was just such a powerful lesson. The mind is powerful. And I literally created symptoms. And I'm a very educated, positive person.
Yeah. No, that's thanks for sharing that. That is fascinating. There's just so many elements of the mind-brain body connection there. And just going back to your friend, I'm really sorry about that he's got the cancer. It's awful.
He's okay. And he's okay now.
That's fantastic. No, I'm so pleased about that. But that's one of those cancers that doesn't show up until it's like pretty bad, and it can be managed. But once again, there's the link between cancer and mind. In fact, 95% of illnesses that manifest in our body, if not higher, are coming from lifestyle issues. And it's not that we're blaming the person, it's the environment that we're living in. It's the immersion of 95% of what we expose to daily is going into our unconscious mind without us even being aware of it. And it's setting ourselves up for who knows what. So it's not that we're going to drop dead at any minute. It's that we do have to recognize that well-being requires work. We have to be very aware. And that's what your book is, a great tool to assist and facilitate that process. I'd love to dive into a little bit of the sort of technique. Now, you talk about how you view nutrition. We've talked a little bit about that. Maybe to talk just a little bit about how you create the principles that will guide people. So an overarching plan. What can people do? They'll read your book, they'll get your book, but what can people do now, and what are they going to get out of the book in terms of a practical side of introducing a more balanced well-being, mind-body well-being approach to their health?
So in terms of what someone can do right now, I would say make sure you have meaningful IRL connections. There's a lot of great science here. Researchers at BYU found that mortality risk for loneliness was the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
I know that study. Yeah, it's huge.
30 years ago, 55% of men reported having at least 6 close friends. Today, that number is half of that. It's 27%. Who knows what it, post-COVID, I think that number has probably shrank. In 2019, a study from Cigna reported that only about half of Americans said they had meaningful daily face-to-face social interactions. Again, this is 2019. Imagine what that is today.
Yeah.
33% of, so like I could go on and on. Like,
yeah, there's a lot out there.
We are lonely. There is a loneliness epidemic, and do not underestimate the health benefits of having IRL meaningful connections. In our opinion, they are paramount.
There was a Wall Street Journal article just this morning that took this idea we talk a lot about in the book about being your CEO of your own health and well-being. And this woman is applying that kind of same framework of having KPIs around IRL connection. So literally assigns herself key performance indicators and a quota system of phone calls, video phone calls, and IRL friendship and IRL connections with friends, because it is something that I think a lot of us need a little bit of a nudge. It's the first thing we dismiss when life gets hectic. But, given the collective big T, little t trauma that we all have after the past 2.5 years, there's a need for it within most of our lives.
Oh, totally. I can't agree with you more. And I think that's an incredibly good place to start, and that's with connections. For those of my audience that don't know what IRL is, do you mind just...
In real life.
There you go. I love it. I love how we use acronyms and people, we have ways of, but they're great because they're catchy. Okay, so that's really a great start. You also mentioned joy right at the beginning of the interview. And it was like the first thing that came out of your mouths. So that's obviously very impactful in how you see well-being. Now here, this is you two run a company that's called mindbodygreen, and it's focused on nutritional supplements, and it's focused on health and wellness and getting balance in how you eat, etc. And you've said one of the first things, you've written a book on this, is joy, the joy of well-being. The book is called The Joy of Well-being. So joy is a big factor in your life. And I know you personally that this is a big deal. So can you add to that, talk about that in terms of the loneliness? I mean, you bring in IRL as the main factor, but joy, I'd love you to talk about that and how you see that in place in terms of well-being.
Finding those little moments of joy, I think, is the lost part of the health and wellness optimization conversation. I think
what you've just said.
At the day, if you are not finding joy in all of these activities, not only they're probably not going to have the impact that they should, but they're not going to be sustainable. And I think sometimes you have to zoom out and really understand the why you're doing something. And if you optimize your protein and your macros, but you're not sitting down to a meal and breaking bread with friends and loved ones, or just enjoying your food, you're not going to achieve that health and well-being. The same thing could apply to exercise, where if you're too maniacal about a routine that then you can't stick to, that's not going to bring you joy. I know that if I were to optimize my routine to maximize for, muscle growth, but I wouldn't get the joy I have in playing pickleball. So I think we need to take all of the information that we have and make sure that we don't lose track of the elements that bring us joy, because the best exercise is the one you're actually going to do.
And I think that we are at such an interesting and exciting time with regards to longevity, in that
for sure
there are interventions, there are protocols that really can extend health span and lifespan. But it quickly goes to this place where you're, measuring lactate and VO2 max, and are you in zone 2? And maybe you're taking metformin or this other, and it's
overwhelming.
It's a lot. And for some people that's okay, and that may bring them joy. But for most people, it's too much. And it is our core belief that joy needs to be center for the individual in their routine. And that there are practices that you can find that can bring you joy and extend health span and lifespan. And, it's an extreme example, but it's one of my favorite studies, is the power of joy and IRL connection, is a study we talk about in the book, the Rosetto study. And Rosetto was is a small rural town in Pennsylvania. And in the 50s and 60s, this is when heart disease essentially entered America. And the rate of heart attacks in people over 65 in Rosetto was half of the nation. For men under 55, there were no cases of heart attacks So researchers were scratching their heads, like, what is going on in this community? These people were smoking, they were drinking, they were eating lots of pasta and meatballs. This made entirely no sense. And when they looked closer, it was a very strong Italian community. Multi-generational living was common. They were having lots of parties, parades, enjoying the wine, food, and whatever they were smoking with family and friends. And they identified that as the secret, because in the 1960s, what happened is communities started to break apart. People started to move away. And guess what? Heart disease arrived and caught up with the national average. Before it was half, now it's right on track. And it's such a powerful reminder that having a sense of joy, belonging, community, family, and friends is paramount. Because if you're doing all the things with exercise and nutrition and you're meditating and so forth, but no one likes you and you don't like anyone, I would argue you are less healthy than the guy having, all the gluten and the dairy and who's drinking and having a good old time. I would argue that person's probably healthier.
I love that study too, and I cannot agree more. With the line of work that I'm in, I see that all the time. There's a super interesting study that I don't know, you both probably aware of it, but they basically, it's a group of studies, but essentially they show that the way you approach something, like if you're going to do that workout or exactly what you've just said, the way you approach it, how joyful you are, your perception is going to affect the benefit. So you can lose up to 96% of the benefit of that great meal, that great nutrition, that great exercise, if your mind is not right, if the joy is gone, if you're not managing your mind, if whatever. Basically, your mind is going to put it into your body, or it's going to not let it, it's pretty much going to filter it out of your body. So it just shows you how important that is. And we just submitted a study for publication based on some research, which always makes me think of you. Every time I hear the word homocysteine, I think of Jason, because it was one of our first conversations. And I thought, I have to share this with Jason and Colleen, because it's literally, we did this big trial, we've taken all these elements, but in a nutshell, it goes to what you're saying and confirms what you're saying, that when we saw a direct correlation, so significant, between how a person is managing their mind and the immediate impact on their neurophysiology and their homocysteine. And as they manage their mind, so the homocysteine levels normalize in the brain physiology, and controlling toxic thoughts and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's one of multiplicity of correlations. And so the science is there, as you say, the science is there for us to change how we go from mind to brain to body, or mind to body. I mean, brain and body is basically the same thing. Let's talk about some practical stuff. I mean, this is very practical. You've spoken about, building relationships, so important, bringing joy in, and you're speaking about joy in terms of your routines and exercise and diet, etc. But it's also the joy of family connection, as you pointed that out as well. So that's two things. What would be a third practical thing that you could talk about?
I mean, the biggest ROI for me in my health and well-being journey has really been on a 20-year struggle with sleep. When we talk about practicality, you could go 5 days.
I'm on that chapter in your book here. I happen to have that open in the book here.
You could go 5 days without vegetables and you'd be fine. You could go 5 days without exercise and movement. It wouldn't be optimal, but you'd be okay. If you were to go 5 days without sleep, you would likely be in a state of despair. And while I've never gone 5 days without sleep, I've probably gone a couple, and it's a place I wouldn't want to go back to. And I think there's such a connection between sleep, which then is this cascading effect. And we talk about this idea of the wellness wave and this idea of momentum with habits, that once one thing starts going well in your life, it tends to have this ripple effect where other things just happen to go well and fall into place. Unfortunately, the reverse of that is also true. But optimizing for my sleep has been my highest ROI activity in terms of feeling my best. And one of the biggest unlocks that I've had on this journey is the importance of light exposure, especially in the morning, and helping to reset that clock and getting in that 10 to 15 minutes within an hour of waking, and being thoughtful about the light exposure throughout the day. And I think when you are someone who's really suffering from sleep, I look at the guidelines and then I make them far more rigid for myself, not because I embrace rigidity in life, but I know that my caffeine curfew is not sustainable at 12 noon. I have to take it back a few hours. I know that I can't have my phone in my bedroom. It is not a good place for it. It needs to be in a totally other part of where we sleep. But for Jason, he's totally fine with that. It doesn't impact him in the same way. And so I think that's where you really have to hone in on what's going to have a big impact and try to incorporate those changes into your life. And sometimes what you see, even from experts, you may have to modify. And when it comes to the joy, this is where, we do break some of the rules you see, and we watch TV in our bed. Every sleep expert would tell you not to. It brings us a lot of joy. And so, we've gone through the kind of mental calculus of would we want to give that up for this benefit? And, have chosen joy in that regard, even though a sleep expert would not approve of that activity.
I would add, we are careful about what we consume before bedtime in terms of what we watch on television.
Absolutely.
But it does bring us joy. And I think, being rigid can work, but if you're being rigid about something that doesn't bring you happiness, I think you need to reevaluate it. And for us, watching TV before bed allows us to unwind, allows us our mind to wander a bit, get our focus off maybe something from work, and we end up falling asleep, and it works. And 100% every sleep expert would say, do not do that.
As you see, one of my favorite things now, I just love it. I'm smiling away here because I've done so many podcasts and done so much about sleep. And the one thing I always say to people, and I've written about this as well, is exactly what you've just said. And that is that the more you worry about sleep, the worse it's, well, you didn't say those exact words, but you implied that the more you worry about sleep, the worse it's going to be. And it's amazing. Collectively, we interview all these experts, and it's always like sleep is always a top priority. And that's why I wanted to talk to you specifically about sleep in this interview. Because worrying about sleep does make it worse. The rigidity around it does make it worse. And you've got to find what you need. And so you explain, Colleen, for you take the most rigid rules and you apply them even more in your life. And Jason, you go the complete opposite. And you've worked out you've worked out this bedtime TV thing. It shows that we have to do the N=1. We have to look at the unique individual. We cannot. The sleep industry is one of the worst, in my opinion, when it comes to this extreme anger thing, because we know we need sleep. But worrying about that will actually stop you sleeping. It's worse than not sleeping.
There's
so thank you for
that shows the presence of an alarm clock in a room and how that can have a bad impact on sleep. Because when you wake up in the middle of the night and then you look at the clock and you realize it's 2 a.m, that further exacerbates your sleep chronic issues.
And there are sleep experts who have worked miracles on people who've had insomnia in their lab. But then they get back home to their bedroom and
it's not
there's
so easy.
Performance anxiety. And, it's this idea of resetting your relationship with that room and that experience. And to your point, I think the anxiety around the thing makes it that much worse. And it is difficult. And I empathize with people like Colleen who really do suffer, because Colleen really does suffer. And when you're spiraling, you're spiraling. But I think something she's done, and what experts will say too, is, some days I'm going to have a bad day and it's okay. I think having the attitude is I'm over it forever. I'm never going to have a bad sleep day again.
That's not a good idea.
You're setting yourself up for failure. And don't be harsh on yourself. Colleen has a bad day. She has a bad day, and she said, I had a bad day. And hopefully today is better. If you have, 3 bad days in a row, then it's like, okay, we really need to try to reset here. But I think taking the pressure off of, I had a bad day, and it's not my first, and it won't be my last.
I love that. I can't agree with you more. And I think it's just so much more of a balanced approach. I used to battle sleeping as well, and I don't anymore. I'll have the odd day, but I'll do it. I can drink coffee right up to the last minute.
Oh, we know that.
We know. That's pretty impressive.
You know?
Yeah. You drank more coffee than I did when we had lunch.
Exactly. I beat you, Jason. I've got so you. I didn't
You're
know
half the size of me.
And I can watch TV at the last minute. I can be on my phone. I can be doing research. But it wasn't always like that. It's my mind. If my mind's not calm and settled, if I haven't got to a point where my mind is calm and settled, well, it doesn't matter what I do. All the blue light, whatever, and that will not stop the sleep. So, I mean, will interrupt my sleep. So it's once again up to the individual. And there's no guilt in this whole thing. This is what I love about your approach as well, is that find what works for you. If it is having 10 cups of coffee before bedtime and watching TV and you're relaxed and you've got joy, you're going to sleep. And if it's not, don't drink the coffee after 10 in the morning or whatever the case may be. So I love that approach that you have. Well, there's so much more to cover, but is there anything else that you'd like to any words of wisdom to sort of wrap up this conversation that we haven't yet covered, or that you'd like to re-emphasize or still talk about?
I would just say, it's our belief that health and well-being is a journey. And in that journey, there are good days and bad days, and there are various starting points. And, we've talked about being rigid, and I think be rigid about being flexible.
I love that.
And that's the one thing to be rigid about. Listen to your body. Things will change. What works for me at 48 is entirely different than 38 and 28 and so on. I think always listen to your body. Find a practitioner or a group of people you really trust with your health, and be skeptical. Be skeptical of what you see online. Most people have biases, and try to be aware of your own. And that's a hard process, and try to be aware of other people. And, I think one of the great pieces of advice I got from my doctor, Frank Lipman, a long time ago is, he says, be the conductor of your healthcare orchestra. We're entrepreneurs. We like to say you need to be the CEO of your own health. And I think that means, reading, being educated, and ultimately empowering yourself to make the right decision for you. And don't let someone else tell you what to do.
I love that. Great wisdom. Colleen?
You kind of summed up one of the last chapters where they say, be like water, where health and well-being evolves and you have to be open to new sources of information. And I think we need the new tools to be able to listen to the different points of view and then be able to apply it to our lives. But I do believe that if you think at everything through the approach of joy, that you will be able to think through the sustainable habits that are meaningful to you and your family.
Yeah, no matter where you are on the journey, I think you'll really appreciate our book, whether this is new to you or you're wearing your whoop and your aura and you're doing all of those things. There's truly something for everyone, and I think it'll help you reevaluate what you're really doing to maximize your health span and lifespan, and are you doing the right things that are ultimately going to bring you joy along the way?
Well, I think it's a book filled with wisdom, and I'm going to take some of that wisdom and look forward to when I'm back in Miami and we connect and we have some good joy on the beach with your kids and my dogs and that organic pizza we spoke about. So we'll be putting all of it together. We'll be attending to all the joy, the IRL, the good food, the fun, the exercise, the whole lot, and we'll put the whole lot together and talk more about your book. So thank you so much, both of you, for writing the book, for starting mindbodygreen, for the wisdom and the balance and the calmness that you bring to an industry that's kind of got a bit out of whack, as you mentioned in the beginning. So thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, pleasure's ours. Thank you.
Looking forward to our time together in Miami.
I am too. See you soon.